All right, let's go ahead and get started. So welcome to the Managing Jenkins with Gradle talk. If you came here looking for IntelliJ talk, unfortunately the IntelliJ speaker couldn't make it into the country, so we moved this talk to this slot. So first, a little bit about me. My name is Gary Hale. I am a principal engineer at Gradle Inc., used to be formerly Gradleware. Before I joined with the Gradle team, I was a user of Gradle for many years. And one of the things that I did was I wrote this Gradle Jenkins plugin, which we'll be talking about today. Personally, I'm somebody who I style myself as a compulsive automator. I feel like you should automate as much as possible. Automate until there's nothing left to automate, and then you start automating the automation. I think it's the only way to create a livable, bearable, continuous delivery lifecycle. What you should do in this talk, please ask questions. If there's something that's not clear, ask questions. The more you ask questions, the more you're going to get out of this talk. The more interesting it's going to be for you, the more interesting it's going to be for me. So please feel free to interrupt and interact at any point. So a little bit about what we're going to talk about. First, I want to talk about kind of an evolution, or at least my evolution, of trying to figure out how to manage and make sense of a large Jenkins environment. Then I'm going to talk about the Gradle Jenkins plugin itself, talk about some of the basics, a little bit about the DSL that's there. And then I'd like to demonstrate just a couple of quick samples of how we'll use it, or how we can use it. So what is it that we like about Jenkins? What makes Jenkins awesome? Well, first of all, it's open source, which means that the source is available to us. We can always go out and look at it, and if we have questions, try to understand how it works. It also has a nice distributed model, so I can create a farm of a bunch of different servers. I can push my, my jobs out to all these servers and do quite a bit of work from a centralized location. It's extensible, so if it doesn't have functionality that I'm looking for, I can write my own plugins. I can extend Jenkins and put things in there. And it has an active ecosystem. So the core of Jenkins itself is actively under development. They're adding new features, fixing bugs. There's also this very active plugin community. So there's a vast number of plugins that are available out there for Jenkins. But why is Jenkins not awesome? I mean, what tends to be the problem is that once we get beyond a few jobs, it becomes very tedious to maintain. And we start trying to find better solutions for managing our environment. So when I was looking at trying to make sense of this environment that I had, where I had several hundred jobs, I think we were up to about 600 jobs, something like that, I was kind of looking at what are some of the things that I want to be able to do, right? So what are some of the motivations? And the first category of motivation I would present is discipline motivations. So the first thing that I would want to do is be able to track changes. So as things get changed within my Jenkins environment, I want to be able to know when it was changed, who changed it, that sort of thing. Now there are some things that kind of come out of the box with Jenkins. There's like the audit log plugin and a couple other things, the job config history plugin. And these give me a little bit of information about that. But tracking changes is something that we've done for a long time in the SCM world, the source control world. So if I can come up with a solution that allows me to leverage all of my SCM tools, well, then I can just track those changes the way I would any other source control change. I'd like to be able to couple my configuration of my Jenkins job with my project. So as my project is moving through its life cycle, as I'm making changes to how it works, I want to be able to couple the changes to the Jenkins jobs with the changes to the project itself. And I want to be able to perform validations, right? So I want to be able to, if I'm making a change to my Jenkins environment that I only expect to change 3 jobs, I want to be able to validate before I push it out there that I'm only going to change 3 jobs. What I don't want to do is push out a change to 100 jobs and then I have a bunch of angry developers asking me why are they receiving all these emails about failed builds and things like that. So if I can do something where it allows me to validate my changes before I push them out, then that's going to help with my discipline. Another category of motivations here would be maintenance, right? So the first thing, minimize overhead. I want to make my job easier. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time clicking around in the Jenkins GUI to make a bunch of changes. I want to be able to do those very efficiently and very fast. If at all possible, I want to leverage my existing skill set. So if I know Groovy, I want to be able to do those, make my changes, with a Groovy tool. There's nothing wrong with a polyglot environment or having a lot of different tool sets out there. But if I'm leveraging an existing skill set, I might be able to find some synergies between some of the different automation that I have for my projects or my organization. I want it to be as dry as possible, right? So if I'm making a change to 100 different things, what I really want to do is make that change once and have it be applied to 100 different things. I don't want to have to make 100 different changes. Ideally, I'd like to be able to rebuild from scratch as well. And there's probably a bunch of different use cases for this. One of those might be to bring up a brand new server somewhere and bring down an old server. Maybe I'm growing the size of my environment or the size of my master or something. It would be nice if I could just make some changes to a script or something like that. I bring up my new server and then push out all of my jobs and the such in one fell swoop. And lastly, I might want to be able to delegate some responsibilities out. So if I'm, say, a build engineer in a large environment, I've got a lot of development teams, I might want to delegate out some responsibility to them for configuring their jobs as well. So I would like to have a tool that allows me to do that. And kind of part and parcel to that is the ability to enforce standards. So if I'm delegating a lot of stuff out, there might be still things that I want to have as standard configuration within my environment. And I want to be able to enforce that, and I'd like a tool that helps me to do so. Okay. So what I want to talk about now is just a little bit like my evolution in terms of learning how to better manage my Jenkins environment. It's probably pretty typical evolution. One thing I will say, though, is I'm not trying to position the Gradle Jenkins plugin as being the best possible solution, but what I'd like to do is position it so that it's clear where it kind of, what its strengths and its qualities are. So if you're like me, you found Jenkins, pretty neat, you start creating jobs. Pretty soon you realize that there's this copy from existing, so I don't have to reconfigure every job every time. I can just copy a job and then make a few edits, and that's fine. But pretty soon, I've got 30, 40, 50 jobs, and I decide that I want to add a new plugin. Well, I have 30 or 40, 50 jobs that now I have to go back in and edit manually, and I realize that I have to have a better solution. So one of the first things that you might come across are what I would call scripting solutions. So these are things like the script console within Jenkins, the ability to run system Groovy scripts, the Scriptler plugin, and these are basically Groovy scripting mechanisms that allow you to modify the Jenkins configuration. And then at some point, you might start looking at what I would term job-like solutions. So these are things like the Jenkins Template plugin or the very fine Jenkins Job DSL. And these kind of run as jobs inside your Jenkins environment and allow you to manage a single Jenkins instance. But if you've got a very large organization or something about how you do your business where you might have multiple Jenkins server farms, different masters, these jobs just kind of run inside the box. They're inside a single Jenkins instance. But when you start talking about multiple instances, you have to start thinking about external solutions, things that operate outside of the box that can manage multiple instances. And one thing that's out there is the Jenkins Job Builder. And then there's also the Gradle Jenkins plugin, which is what I'm going to talk about today. So there's not a whole lot to be said about manual solutions, other than to say that at some point, the number of jobs that you have just become overwhelming. You need to find a higher order solution to, how am I going to manage this environment? So with script solutions, again, these are a way to run Groovy scripts within Jenkins that modify the environment. They're extremely powerful. What you're really doing is modifying the objects within the running Jenkins instance and making changes that way, as if you were making those changes through the the GUI. It does require significant understanding of the Jenkins model, right? So you have to understand, to make this change to this particular attribute for this job, what are the objects that I have to traverse to get to that particular change? And what you find yourself doing is, ultimately, there's not a lot of good information on this. You ultimately end up going out and pulling down the Jenkins source and looking through all of that. And that becomes a little bit tedious. If I'm only changing one thing, do I really want to spend 20 minutes looking through source code trying to figure out how to do it? It is written in Groovy, so it does leverage our existing skill set. I mean, if you're here at the Gradle conference, you're probably doing a little bit of Groovy development. One of the downsides of this is that it has limited capabilities for parameterization, right? So what you find yourself doing is copying scripts around, or kind of creating little blocks at the beginning of your scripts that have all of the parameters, and you edit them before you run them, that sort of thing. But it's not, it's really kind of clunky. It's not very elegant. But what these scripts usually are good for are one-off type things, where I'm going to change one thing across my entire environment. I'm going to do it once, and then I'm never going to look back. But not necessarily for things that I might want to reuse scripts over and over and over again in different contexts. So when we start talking about job-like solutions, there's the Job Template plugin. Now what this is this is the ability to create a job within Jenkins that has I might configure a particular builder or a publisher or something like that. And then what I do is I point to this thing from all these other jobs, and you create this many-to-one relationship, right? And so whenever those jobs run, what they're actually doing is grabbing that configuration from the template job. These tend to work out better when they're combined. So by that, what I mean is, instead of creating one big template, what I want to do is create a lot of little templates and combine them together in jobs. Because when I have one big template, the problem that I run into is that sooner or later, I have, say, 400 jobs that use this single template, and I decide that 120 of these actually should be different. I want to do something slightly different with them. And so I split that template up. But now I'm back in that situation. I've got 120 jobs that I want to change. So these tend to work a lot better when you keep them very small, very granular. So the Job DSL plugin is a pretty nice tool. A lot of people get to the point where they're using the Job DSL plugin, and they're pretty good with that, and they don't really move too much further in their evolution. But what this is a very powerful DSL for describing jobs, modeling jobs. And in fact, this DSL is what we use in the Gradle Jenkins plugin to allow you to configure jobs. Now, this DSL, it's just Groovy script, right? So it's storable. I can put this into source control and track it in that way. It has the support for template jobs, which are just jobs that provide various templates. But unlike the Job Template plugin, it's much easier to kind of split these up and reuse them in different ways. One of the downsides of this is that there isn't a good way to validate your jobs before you push them out there. So there are some things that are out there that may allow you to, say, take your Job DSL, generate the XML for the jobs, and then you can maybe do some validation that way. But it's not really easy to use. It's not kind of a first-class citizen for the Job DSL plugin. And the other thing is it really only operates within one instance. If I have multiple instances, if I have a dozen different Jenkins servers, I have a dozen different instances of my Job DSL seed jobs and things like that. Sure.
So when you talk about validation, so this is you're saying you'll push out a sample job from your template and just have it run it once?
No, actually, what I'm saying is that what I want to do is make some changes and then run my validation and find out, well, what's actually going to change, right? So is it just these 3 jobs, or is it 100 jobs? I mean, I want to have some kind of idea before I actually make my change that, what is it going to do? It's, kind of like a dry run sort of thing. Does that make sense? Oh, yeah, sorry. So the question was the validation. What is that? Is that something like pushing out a sample job and then, being able to validate it that way? And the answer is that no, actually what it is the ability to kind of do a dry run before I push my jobs out there, see that only the jobs that I expect to change will actually change.
Can you go over what you said about the one instance again?
Yeah, so the idea is that the question was, can you go over what I meant by the one instance again? So with the Job DSL plugin, right, it's kind of contained within a single Jenkins master, right? So if I had 12 masters, I would have 12 different seed jobs and all of the stuff that goes into making the Job DSL stuff work. Does that make sense? Okay.
I think I have a solution for that.
Okay, yeah, and there may be some solutions to some of these things. I'm just kind of pointing out some of the ways that it differs from the way the Gradle Jenkins plugin can work too. So when we start talking about external solutions, the first thing you might find is Jenkins Job Builder. And what this is it's a Python tool that has a YAML configuration. And it produces, it's part of the OpenStack suite of solutions. And it produces some very clean configuration. But kind of the downside of this is that it's purely declarative. Now, there are some ways to do some macros. They have like a macro functionality, but you don't really have the capabilities of a programming language like you would with something like Gradle, where you can do looping and make use of all of the goodness that Groovy brings to the table. So we get to the Gradle Jenkins plugin, and this is ultimately what we ended up doing. And this is a purely programmatic solution, so it is a Gradle script, right? It runs in there. So you've got all of the programming capabilities of Groovy. It allows us to do direct XML manipulation of jobs if I wanted to, or I can make use of the Jenkins Job DSL. So what I can do is actually put Jenkins Job DSL into my Gradle scripts, or I can leave Job DSL out into like script files and the such and just pull them in and reference them from my script. And I can easily take an existing Jenkins Job DSL installation and convert it over to a Gradle Jenkins plugin. It does have support for template jobs. These exist only in the Gradle configuration and are just used as templates for the jobs that get pushed out there. So unlike something like the Job Template plugin, it doesn't actually have like kind of these null jobs that sit in your environment. These all exist just in your Gradle scripts. It has the ability to do creation, deletion, and validation of the environment. So what it actually does for validation is, the question was, how do you validate it? What it actually does for validation is an XML diff. And by that, I mean that it checks to see if the same elements, attributes, and values are there. And so, it's not just a straight textual diff, but it's a little bit more smart. But what it's doing is it'll go and grab the job that's out there, compare it to the job that would be pushed out there if you did, and say, are there any differences between these two? Was there another question here? Yeah.
Maybe I'm ahead of myself, but might that be better to push that back into the Job DSL itself as opposed to putting it in the Gradle Jenkins plugin? I mean, would it not be better but this extends beyond just the Job DSL.
Yeah, so the question was, would it be better to push this into the Job DSL or leave it in the Gradle Jenkins plugin? And I think the answer is that, the Job DSL really is just for describing the jobs themselves. But this is kind of a layer on top of it. And you can think about the Gradle Jenkins plugin as being kind of a way to pull the Jenkins Job DSL functionality outside of the container, outside of the Jenkins instance, and manage it, externally, right? Okay, so before we move forward, I want to ask a quick question, which is, does it make sense? Is it a good fit to manage Jenkins with a build automation tool? Just think about that. We'll come back to that. So some kind of core concepts here that I want to talk about. Kind of key here is this idea of a static model versus a live model. So the static model is what exists in my Gradle build. This is how I've modeled my jobs, my views, and I've also got templates in there as well. The live model is what actually exists up on my server. So whenever I'm doing functions or I'm running tasks with the Gradle Jenkins plugin, I'm operating on one or both of these models. So for instance, updating would be taking everything that's in the static model, pushing it up to the live model. Validation would be comparing everything that's in the static model with what's in the live model, that sort of thing.
Do you have another way of pulling from the live model to be a static model?
Yes, there is some limited functionality for that. So there's a task called dump remote Jenkins jobs, and so what you could do, yeah. So the question was, I'm terrible about this, so I got to keep doing this. The question was, is there a way to take what's in the live model, pull it down into the static model? And the answer is yes, you can. What you can do is model, but what you would have to do is model the job in the static model first, at least from the job name perspective. And then you could do a dump remote Jenkins jobs. And what that does is pulls whatever's in the live model down and dumps it on your file system. So you could, you would have the XML at that point. The other way, and the part of the reason why that isn't really a first-class citizen is that you've got a really nice interface for pulling that stuff down already, in that I can just use the job name /config, and that's going to pull down the XML for my job already. So I can easily get to those jobs, or an existing job within Jenkins. Does that answer your question? Okay. All right. So let's start with talking about some of the tasks in the Gradle Jenkins plugin. The first task is update Jenkins items. And this is just going to take whatever's in my static model, push it up to the live model. So it's going to make everything appear. If a job already exists up on the, in the Jenkins instance, it's going to overwrite it. The next task is delete Jenkins items. And what this allows me to do is delete whatever's in my static model from the live model, right? So I might have additional things in my live model that I've created for some other purpose. It's not going to delete those, but it's going to delete everything that I've got defined in my static model. I've also got dump Jenkins items, and what this does is takes everything in the static model, everything that's been modeled in my Gradle script, and dumps it out to file. So it's going to take whatever I've defined, turn it into the actual XML that would have been pushed up to Jenkins, and then dump it into a directory in my project. Then there's validate Jenkins items. This is what we've talked about for validation. It's going to do an XML comparison, look at what's in the static model, what's in the live model, and decide whether all of the same elements, attributes, and values exist. Is it functionally the same job, is what it's trying to determine. And finally, there's dump remote Jenkins items. So what this does is it says, for all of the jobs that are in my static model, find that same job on the, in the live model, dump it down into a XML file on the file system. Okay. So start by talking about kind of the high-level conventions here. First of all, I've got the Jenkins block, which is all of the configuration for this is contained inside this Jenkins closure here. Now, the first thing that I can configure are servers. These are the servers that I might push out to. So I could have as many servers defined here as I want to. I can point different jobs at different servers. And this is just going to represent all of the servers in my farm that I'm managing with this particular build. I've also got templates, and these represent template jobs that I can then reference from my jobs themselves. So I can create one template, spin off as many jobs as I want to, that just maybe vary that job in a few minor attributes. What's the question?
Sorry, back to servers. If I have an authentication for my Jenkins, is it the project should I configure?
Yeah, so you can configure authenticated as well as unauthenticated. So the question was, can I configure authenticated servers in the model here? And the answer is yes. And I'll show you an example of that in a minute.
When you say servers, you mean the masters, right?
When I say servers, do I mean the masters? Yes. Yeah, so these are the masters. I don't care about the slaves. I'm pushing configuration into the master. The master knows about the slaves. I don't, you know, in the Gradle Jenkins plugin, it's really not material.
For the templates, do you have a dependency on the template plugin itself, or it's just a concept here?
Yeah, no. The question is, do I have a dependency on the template plugin itself? And the answer is no. These exist within the Jenkins plugin itself. There's no dependency on an external plugin. Okay, so the next thing is jobs. These represent the jobs that are going to exist in my environment, as well as the views block, which is going to represent any views and will reference the jobs that I've specified. So first we have servers. So to specify a server, I really only need the URL as well as a username and password. Now, I probably wouldn't put username and password in the script. I'd probably have this stored off into a Gradle.properties or something like that. If I'm running from the console and I haven't specified username or password, it'll prompt for a username and password. But I can also do unsecured servers as well. So the default is to expect a server to be secured. If I want to specify that it's unsecured, I have to explicitly tell it that it's secure is equal to false. Are there any mechanisms for tokens or keys? Right now, there aren't. And that's something that I would like to add at some point, but no, there isn't. So templates, with most of the different templates, jobs, views, there's multiple forms of that configuration. In this, the XML form, what I'm doing is basically I've got a raw XML file somewhere on my file system, and I'm telling it that for this template, read in this XML file, and that's going to represent the template. So anything that uses that template is going to have all of the configuration attributes of the job described in this file. And this job is going to be, this is simply the configuration that I might pull down from a Jenkins configuration. Now, this is showing the file form for this. I could also specify this as a string, or I could specify it as a like an XML slurper configuration. But there's also a DSL form, which allows me to read in Jenkins Job DSL. So DSL file template.dsl, this would read in whatever DSL has been configured in this template.dsl file and make that the basis of the template. For jobs, again, there's also this XML form of the job, which would read in a raw XML file and specify the job. Now notice that I've got servers 1 here. So what this is saying is that build job 1 is going to be deployed to the server 1 that I specified before in my servers block. All right, oops, one more. So server 1 is how I specified. So these are all named domain object containers. So servers.server1 is how I would reference this server from my jobs or my views. I don't necessarily, come on, there we go. I don't necessarily have to specify a server for each and every job. If I'm only deploying to one server, I can set up a default server. And what that default server says is that for every job that hasn't specified its servers, use this server. DSL form, so in this case, I'm actually embedding DSL into the script. This is obviously very, very simplistic. In a real scenario, what I would do is apply this template and then add additional configuration on top of that. But this is using the actual Jenkins Job DSL to access the template 1 template. So template 1 is created in our templates block, and then I'm referencing it here inside of the DSL block for the job. No. No. The question was, can you accumulate multiple templates? And the answer is no. You really have one template, and then you build on top of that. Now, the reality is that you could work around that with some clever programming where your template is actually some sort of function or closure that I apply, and I can apply multiple of those if I wanted to. Views, same sort of thing. There's an XML form. There's also a DSL form to our views.
Are you pulling down these files from Jenkins, or do they sit aside and you're pushing them to Jenkins?
The question is, am I pulling these files down from Jenkins, or am I pushing them up to Jenkins, right? And the answer is yes. The reality is that I'm pushing up to Jenkins most of the time, but what I'm pushing up there may have been something that I pulled down from Jenkins previously, right? So my template may have been something, that XML file, that raw XML file, may have been something that I configured in Jenkins, then pulled it down, and then used that as a template for all of the jobs that I'm pushing up. So that's one way that you could utilize it. But
Or you pull it, change it, and then you can push it back to it.
Yep. Yeah, so that's what, the question being, so you'd pull it and then change it, and, that's what you push out there. The answer is that that's one way you could do it, right, is pull the XML down, change the XML, and then have, the Jenkins plugin push it up there. The other is that you do your configuration, you configure your template in Jenkins, then pull it down, and then have the Gradle Jenkins plugin use that template, and then build on top of that for, some larger number of jobs that you're pushing out there. So there's a lot of different ways that you can approach it, and that's why you've got an XML form, you've also got a DSL form, you've got a lot of flexibility in how you create your jobs.
Question about the view?
Sure.
Earlier today, in this one, actually, there was a presentation about automating the creation of build pipelines.
Uh-huh.
The pipeline plugins, and those are view, right?
Yes.
The view model in Jenkins.
Yes.
Do you support those kind of specific views that come through?
Yeah. So the question was, do we support build pipeline views within Jenkins? And the answer is yes. The Job DSL, the Jenkins Job DSL, has support for that. So by virtue of that we can use Jenkins Job DSL, then we can support pipeline views and that sort of thing. And I think that there's you can support kind of like the classic view. You can support the nested views, and then you can support pipeline views. And there may be some others there that I'm just not thinking of off the top of my head. Yeah, so the question was, how about CloudBees folders? And that is one place where the Jenkins plugin is a little bit clunky. There is the ability to override what the different URLs look like. And that's the problem with CloudBees, is that it actually changes the URLs to something that's slightly different than classic Jenkins. And so within the Gradle Jenkins plugin, there is a way to override the different URLs for creating jobs, deleting jobs, etc. And so what you can do is create a job at a specific URL, right, that references that folder. It's not as nice as I would like it to be, but you can do it. It is possible. And the last thing here that I want to talk about is the multiple DSL form. And what this allows me to do, if I've got an existing Jenkins Job DSL environment, I might have a whole bunch of DSL scripts that I want to pull in. And so instead of configuring each job individually, what I want to do is just pull in all of the .dsl files in a particular directory. And so what this will do, read all those in, create a list of jobs based on what's in there, and push that up there too. So this is just another way to organize your DSL and scripts.
Can you elaborate a little bit? I'm sorry, I don't see the.
Okay.
You load multiple DSL files, and how do you reference them?
Okay, so the question was, can I elaborate on that? If I've got multiple DSLs, what does that really mean? So in this case, imagine that I've been using Jenkins Job DSL for the past year, and now all of a sudden I've got 5 different servers that I want to manage. And so I decide I want to try out Gradle Jenkins plugin. Well, I don't want to go into my Gradle script and recreate all of that configuration that I already have in existing DSL scripts out there. So what I want to do is just pull all of those scripts in. And so what this is going to do is look in these DSL files. They're going to have things like the job name and all of the configuration there. And it's just going to pull it in from there instead of having to explicitly list out the jobs that I'm creating in some way. Does that answer your question?
If you started out with, say, a manual approach with hand-edited jobs, is there a way of exporting that to DSL?
No, not that I'm aware of. The question was, is there a way to take manually configured jobs and exporting them to DSL? No, there's not a way that I know of. But you could pull the raw XML down and use those as templates or something like that. I mean, and that may be the way to do it. But I'm not aware of any way to translate existing XML into Jenkins Job DSL.
You just take the mapping and turn it into a DSL, the XML mapping, but I don't know if anybody's actually done it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that you could do some clever things with Groovy. I mean, it's great at reading XML and things like that, but there's nothing kind of that I know of out of the box that would do that. Okay. So do some demonstrations here. Unfortunately, we will not have a crocodile involved. Apparently, there's some problems with city ordinances and the use of large reptiles in public spaces. But so let's go ahead and look at some quick examples here. Got about 10 minutes left. So the first example I want to look at is just a basic config to give you an idea of what it looks like. Let me make this a little bit larger. So let's go into Okay, so what we see at the very beginning here is that I've got a build script block that pulls in my Gradle Jenkins plugin. You can also use the new 2.0 plugin DSL, which would be much more terse, but you can also use the legacy form. But I apply the plugin com.terrafolio.jenkins. Yeah. Is the font big enough for you to see it? You want me to make it a little bigger? It's all right? Okay. And then I have my Jenkins block, and the first thing I do is define a server. So I'm looking for a server on the local host at 8080, and I'm telling it that the secure is equal to false, and I'm naming that server demo. And then remember I said that I could define a default server. So here I'm just saying that there's a default server called servers.demo, and if any job doesn't specify its own configuration, then just use that. Now for my job definition, what I've got is a job. I'm going to call it demo job. And then I'm referencing the XML file buildjob.xml that's here locally. If I look at buildjob.xml, this is an XML file that's just been pulled down from Jenkins. It's been configured some way. I've got a few things in here. I've got like a choice parameter in there and a couple other things, a description, that sort of thing. So let's just go ahead and run this guy. So if I do Gradle update Jenkins items, starts a daemon and goes. So it pushes that job up to my local server 8080. So if we look at localhost 8080, we see that I didn't have anything in there before. If I refresh it, we see that I got my demo job in there. If I look at that demo job, look at the configuration, we'll see some of the stuff that I had in my job. So like my choice parameter is in there and the description that I put in there for test. So that's just a very simple example of a single job. Now at this point I could do validate Jenkins items. And we see that it comes back and it just basically says build successful, which means that the static model matched the live model. Now let's just go ahead and make a quick change in here. change to break validation there. Now I'm going to run validate again, and we see that it failed, and it tells me that the item demo job differs from what's up on the server there. At the same time, I can do delete Jenkins items. This is going to remove that job from the server. And now if I go and look, we'll see that, oops, yeah, well, I'm getting a 404 now because the job is gone. If I look at here, we see that I don't have any jobs configured in here anymore. Question?
So when it's validating, is it essentially just grabbing the XML and comparing?
Yeah, it's doing an XML comparison. Yeah, it's not a textual comparison. What it is, yeah, the question was when I pull down, or when I do the validation, is all I'm doing comparing the job XML? And the answer is yes. But it's doing an XML comparison. It's not doing a textual comparison. It's actually trying to determine if the configuration is functionally the same. If
Yeah, if you have a large, let's say, job with lots of configuration, it might be difficult to figure out where it differs.
Yeah, so if you were to run this with info, so you did info, it's going to show you all the differences that it found. Some of those might not be functional differences, right? So it's going to give you a lot more information than probably what you want, but you can find out from that information, you know, specifically what are the differences.
So there was a DSL configuring the job instead of the XML. It runs DSL, generate XML.
Yeah, so the question was if you're using DSL instead of raw XML, is the DSL going to generate XML to push up there? And that's exactly what it does. It uses that Jenkins Job DSL to kind of model it, then it produces XML, and that's what it actually pushes out onto the server.
It does that for validation too, right? Like it would do the generation of the XML.
Yes, so the question was, does it do that for validation too? That's exactly what it does. It generates the XML, then compares what it, you know, the two. Right. Okay, so in the interest of time, let me just jump over to, kind of running out of time here. Let me go to the last example here. And I'll show you something a little bit larger. So let's look at build.gradle. And so what I've got in here, again, I've got my build scripts. And then for each project in this instance, what I'm going to do is create multiple, I'm going to create about 100 different jobs, right? And so what we see here is that I've actually got two different servers. I've got the non-prod server and then a prod server. And I'm going to push different jobs out to different places depending on what's in that job. Now, you probably have something more sophisticated than just a loop of 0 to 100. But the point is that you could get that information from someplace else. You might be querying something like your Git management server or something like that to find out what are all the branches that are available, or some other source of information. And so what I'm going to do here is that I'm creating a template called build template. So I'm going to create build jobs and deployment jobs. My build jobs are going to be based off of the build template, and they've got some common configuration here. So the SCM trigger is first, and this is all Jenkins Job DSL here inside the DSL block. Then I'm going to create a step to do a Gradle build, and the Gradle build is going to run the build task. And then I've got publishers that do some things like send out emails and the such. And then I've also got deploy templates. And this is going to run a Gradle task deploy and also send out an email. Now, this is all being done at the top level in the root script build, or the root build script. If we look at what I have in here, I've also got sub-projects here of builds and deployments. And these are going to specify individual builds and deployments. So if I look at builds, what we see here is that I'm looking at all the different projects that I've defined, those 100 different projects. I'm going to create a build job for each branch. Now, my branches I've defined statically up here, so I've got a master and a develop branch. And then I've got looping over all projects, all branches, and then create a job for each of those. So that's going to create 200 jobs right there. And then I'm going to create views here that are for each branch and project. And so what or not branch and project, but each branch. And so what I'm going to say is, okay, if this is if the branch is equal to master, then I'm pushing it to the servers.prod. Otherwise, I'm pushing it to servers.nonprod. So I should see all of my jobs for master up on the prod server, all of my jobs for develop on the non-prod server. And I've done the same thing up there for the job itself. And so then I just configure some things about the view, and I provide a regex there to specify my jobs. And so let's just go ahead and run this guy. And we're going to push out about 300 jobs, something like that.
While this is running,
Yes, question.
if you're using some sort of a Jenkins plugin, does it come with DSL that you can use?
Yeah, so the Jobs DSL has to support your. The question was, if you're using a Jenkins plugin, does it come with a DSL that you can use? Well, the Jenkins Job DSL has to support it. If you go out and look at what the Job DSL has out there, it supports a lot of the major plugins that are available. There may be some that it doesn't support. In that case, what you can do is drop down into direct XML manipulation to manage that as well.
Could you then combine XML with the DSL?
Yeah, the question is, can you combine XML with DSL? And the answer is yes. You know, ordering is important, right? So typically what I would do is apply the DSL first and then apply all of my XML transformations later, because you can get into kind of some weird situations if you mix them together. But it is possible. There's no doubt about it. So I pushed out about 300 jobs in something like 20 seconds. It'd probably be even faster on a more highly powered machine. If I look out here, this is my non-prod server. See that I've got all of my jobs here. I can look at develop builds. These are all of my develop builds. The deployments, I split those up between different environments. So I've got a staging environment and a test environment. And if I look at the other server, which is on port 8081, we'll see that here are all my prod jobs. So I've got my master builds as well as my production deployments. So those are some examples of this. So let me skip back to, let's come back to our question. Does it make sense to manage Jenkins with a build automation tool? I think it's the wrong question. I think the right question is Gradle a build automation tool? Is a Swiss Army knife a knife? So, yes, it is, of course, it's a knife, but it's also so much more, and I think that's true of Gradle, is that it's much more than a build automation tool. It happens to be very good at build automation, but it's also a project automation platform. You can use it to solve just about any automation problem in your continuous delivery pipeline. So if you take away nothing from this, I hope you take away that mindset that I can use Gradle for a lot of things other than just building and testing my software. Got some references here, the reference to the Gradle Jenkins plugin, as well as the demos from this demonstration. You had a question before, or were you trying to answer my question?
Actually, I had two remarks. First of all, can I, for example, redo the whole mess of projects you created, but actually use a matrix instead of just dedicated projects that do certain things?
So when you say a matrix, like a matrix build within Jenkins? Yeah, I'm pretty sure that the DSL supports matrix builds as well. So the question was, can I redo, you know, the configuration, but using a Jenkins matrix build instead of just freestyle builds? And the answer is yes.
Okay, and the second was more of a remark. Basically, I think one could actually run Jenkins within Gradle.
Meaning starting Jenkins up from within Gradle, or? Yeah.
Technically, you can start a Jetty engine within
Yes.
Gradle. So.
Yeah. So the question or the comment was that you could potentially start Jenkins from within Gradle, And yeah, and in fact, look at the Gradle Jenkins plugin. You'll see an example of that for my integration tests. I start up a Jenkins instance before I run my integration tests, run my tests and then stop it afterwards. But it's as easy as starting any other process within Gradle, which is just using like an exec task or something like that. Question?
So if I wanted to manage my Jenkins instance, not just from a jobs perspective, but like you said, being able to re-provision the Jenkins instance,
Mm-hmm.
am I allowed to, or does this plugin allow me to declare what Jenkins plugins need to be there?
Okay, so the question is if I wanted to provision my Jenkins instance and not just pushing jobs up there, could I declare what Jenkins plugins need to be available before I push my jobs up there? The answer is right now, no. But just recently, well, say relatively recently, say in the last 6 months, Jenkins supports the ability to specify what plugins are necessary when you push a job up. So you push a job up, and then it'll actually install that plugin as part of that whole process. I haven't built that into the Gradle Jenkins plugin yet. It's fully on my roadmap, my intentions to do so, but it's not there quite yet. But it hasn't historically been supported by Jenkins, so that was the blocking.
Because if you could control that, you could run integration tests with new versions of Jenkins itself, and new versions of plugins, right? Because you're re-provisioning all your jobs.
Right.
Run your job.
Yeah, and the comment was that you could potentially do integration tests with new versions of Jenkins and new versions of plugins. And the reality is that you could potentially do that now, right? So as part of your Gradle integration test that you're writing, the first thing you do is explode that war somewhere, copy all of the appropriate plugins in there, and then start up the instance and do that. So if you were going to track all of those things, those plugins and the such, outside of the jobs themselves, you could potentially do that.
Basically trying to capture all the infrastructure as code.
Yes, and that's the ultimate target here. I mean, it's not quite, we're not quite there in terms of the configuration for Jenkins. There's not a lot of facilities for doing the configuration, but ultimately we want to get to the point where it's infrastructure as code.
So first, a follow-up, do you envision in the future on the roadmap that you will have a DSL to provision that Jenkins instance and say, I want this plugin, and you can rebuild
Yeah.
the instance?
I don't think it'll even, the question was, do I envision that as being DSL, where I define the plugins themselves? I don't envision that, but I believe the way I'm trying to remember off the top of my head how Jenkins has exposed that capability. And I want to say that there's like a URL that you hit with a job, and it will install what's necessary there. I don't know. I don't think it's going to be in DSL. I think it's going to be implicit in the job. The fact that the job uses it then tells Jenkins enough so that he can install the necessary things.
So you don't need a DSL to say it.
Right.
I have another question, if that's okay, sorry.
Sure.
The use case where you update jobs that are already there, based on a template, you have a difference, so you're going to push the new configuration to those jobs. Is there a way to determine which job you're pushing to based on a query that you're going to make, rather than a static list or?
So the question was, in the instance where I'm actually going to update an existing job, is there any way to determine which job I'm going to update? Yeah. So when you run that Jenkins validation, it's going to tell you which jobs specifically are different and would be changed.
But what if I want to push? I know there's a change. I want to push it, but only to a number of jobs that depends on what's already there.
So you only want to. The question is, can I specify like a subset of jobs or a subset of servers? Yeah, there are some filters that you can apply that allow you to filter the jobs that I'm actually going to operate on. You can also create tasks, and I didn't cover this in the talk just because of time, but you can also configure tasks that will do the same thing, right? So they filter by job and by server. Okay.
What are the new features that got added to the Gradle Jenkins plugin since last year?
Since last year, not much. So the question was, what new features have been added to the Gradle Jenkins plugin since last year? And the answer is that there hasn't been a lot, mostly because of time constraints on my side. There has been updates to newer versions of Job DSL and other dependencies and the such, but that's about it. There's nothing of particular note since last year. Okay, well, thank you for coming, guys.